Okay, today's shir is sponsored by Ilu Nishmas Achavar Peretz Yechiel Aryeh ben Rav Moshe Yehuda. Okay, so I'm not sure the way. Let's start like this. I'm not sure if this is the proper way, but let's start like this. In 1950, the state of Israel passed a law called the Law of Return, where basically anybody who has one Jewish parent, I think that's all you needed, even if you're not considered Jewish by Orthodox standards, meaning even if your father's Jewish, has an automatic right to emigrate to Israel and get Israeli citizenship. Now, the law was tested many times, and it went through a bunch of different gevulim. Now, one of the famous tests the law got is in 1970, a famous mobster from New York, Meyer Lansky, tried to run away and avoid his tax evasion case by running to Israel and claiming Israeli citizenship. Ultimately, it took 2 years for the legal battle, and he was shipped back to America, where he actually was acquitted, and in 1974 moved to Miami and lived out the rest of his days. So they tweaked the law in 1970 to say that someone who's like a detriment to the state or a danger to the state does not have the right of return. Then in the 1990s, there were several cases that made like big headlines regarding the law of return. And one of them was a guy, Samuel, I think his name was Shunheim, a kid from Maryland. He was, Jewish from Maryland. And when he was 17 years old, he murdered a classmate of his in his small town of Maryland. They burnt the body, disposed of it in a house somewhere, and in the interim, while he was able to get away, he ran to Israel together with his father and his sisters and his mother. The whole family picked up and moved to Israel and claimed law of return Israeli citizenship. Now they were eventually found out who was alleged for the crime, and the American authorities sued for extradition. They wanted him to be extradited back to America. Originally, the court in Yerushalayim, when he was brought in, said no, law of return. It went to the Israeli Supreme Court. And ultimately they decided that as the law was written at that time, they could not extradite him, and they kept him in Eretz Yisrael to be judged. He received a sentence of 24 years of prison in Israel, and in 2016 or something, he shot 6 guards and ended up getting shot in prison. So he's dead. He was obviously a big tzaddik. Now, Teichad Dvarim, one of the big nekudas that they were handling there, when it came to the Supreme Court, the big chelik of the nidin is it Mesirah to give over this kid who, assuming he's guilty, we assume he killed someone in Maryland, is it Mesirah for the Israeli government to give him over to the American government to face justice? And one of the Supreme Court justices who was against the ruling, who felt that they should give him over, Judge Menachem Alon, or Yamaka, from Ishkai, wrote a Chiyuv where he says that the din of Mesirah would not apply, and you should give over, Shmuel Shunshine to the American authorities. Now, what did he base it on? So he brings a very interesting Aruch HaShulchan. Aruch HaShulchan in Siman Shem Pei Ches in Cheshem Mishpah has like a little star, and right before he starts the Sugya of Mesirah, the Aruch HaShulchan writes as follows. He says, Yadua l'kol kairei adaris, says the Aruch HaShulchan. It's a bavus tezach, to anybody who knows history. Shebizman akadmoin b'medinas archaikis, in earlier times in far-flung regions, le'hoya le'ish bitachon begufay mamaynei. A person had no security, not over his body or his money, because of the lawlessness that existed. It says there are still some, underdeveloped third world countries out there where the government is still, not up to par and there's no security. Says the Aruch HaShulchan, in those circumstances when there is no security, and you have to really, things are very tenuous, that's what all the dinim of Mesirah, Malshin, and Shas and Paiskim are referring to. Someone who gives over his friend to authorities such as these, you're putting him in tremendous danger. You're a roidif financially and physically. And therefore, there's such a severity to being a Mesirah. And then he says, we should speak highly of the kings of Europe. Tsar Nikolai, I think Tsar Nikolai II or III, who was the Tsar when the Aruch HaShulchan was the Rav in Navardik. And his fathers, his forefathers, the Tsars, Umalchei Britannia, the kings of Britain, who spread their colonizing tentacles in all over the globe, and they taught justice. So that every person could have security on his body and his money. So the Aruch HaShulchan writes, in no uncertain terms, that the whole sugya of Mesirah and the whole sugya of Malshinus was said in a different time, different era. It was said when people were wild and uncivilized and couldn't be relied on for proper justice. But in a time like today, where, he's talking, imagine Tsar Nikolai, that justice is so solid that everyone's going to get a fair shake, so then there's no problem with Mesirah. Likewise, the Chlichemda in one of his svarim writes very similar. So Judge Menachem alone presents this in his Chiyuv, and he says it's Mefurish, the Aruch HaShulchan was, l'chayr the Paisik of Litta, right? L'chayr the Paisik of Litta says clearly that there's no issue of Mesirah b'zman hazeh. This is what he says. Now, it ignited like a firestorm amongst Rabbanim, meaning the case itself was in court, but amongst several Rabbanim who wrote Chuvah basically saying, you're a nar. You're very naive. You see something in a sefer that sounds like, just wiping away a whole set of sugyas, a whole set of dinim, and you assume it to be at face value. You know who the czar that the Aruch HaShulchan was living under that he's discussing? It's someone who was obviously a criminal. We know he was a criminal. And the Aruch HaShulchan was clearly afraid, or was not comfortable to write dinim of Mesirah that allow Jews to kill other Jews for something like this. And in these circumstances, of course, he had to tweak it, he had to change it. Now the rejoinder, he writes, the judge wrote back, that we could look at Russian archives from, let's call it 1890 when the Aruch HaShulchan is writing this, and you'll see that although people are getting punished for maybe things that we think is not justified, that they shouldn't be punished for, but it's not in the dark of night. There's a tremendous amount of archives and, layers of bureaucracy, and everything is documented and discussed and written down and organized. So he says what the Aruch HaShulchan means is that there's a system. It's not just free-for-all, like you don't like someone, you kill him and you go away. There's a system. The system's not matim for what you think justice is today. That doesn't mean there's not a system. And maybe that's what the Aruch HaShulchan is talking about. That's what he said. Now, I think that to just assume at face value... Same tkufa. So I think to just assume at face value that what the Aruch HaShulchan is saying is a din l'maisa, and that's what the Aruch HaShulchan held. So that most of the poskim, from our camp, do not assume that. Rabbi Sarah Fisher, others, Rav Chaim Cohen wrote many svarim on Chesed Mishpat, but other poskim seem to say that Aruch HaShulchan shouldn't be assumed at face value, that he just meant that the whole dinim of Meisim fell away because the time is different. Like Rabbi Yaakov Yishaya Bloy, from the Eidah Charedis, who probably wrote the most consequential sefer on Chesed Mishpat, and I don't know, maybe in forever. So in Piskei Choshen, in Chelik Vav, in his parak about Meisrim, he writes that Ubesifrei HaPoskim matzinu shalimdu schos al malchiyos v'shalteinis b'zmaneinu. He says in the Sifrei HaPoskim you'll find that the malamed schos on the kingdoms and the justice systems that exist in our day, she'em bem din Meiser, there's no din Meiser. He says Aval Yedua, it's a davar Yedua. If you have a little seichel, she'be halachas elu shalta yad at cenzura. Like, of course, these are dinim where people are looking over their shoulder. Nobody's comfortable to say what they really think. Sometimes things are added in that weren't supposed to be there. Things are taken out that were supposed to be in there. Certainly, even if there was no direct government body standing over your shoulder and saying, don't write that, people were zicher afraid of their shadow to write things. It's very hard to draw any conclusions from the words that they write. And Mamela says that Niralani is daite, and he brings rayas that the din of Meiser is alive and well. And even, up to today, if someone has the din of Meiser and exactly how to qualify for that, whatever goes into that, but if he has the din of Meiser, you could deal with him the way Meiser were dealt with always, is what the Yaakov Yishaya Bloy says based on the Aruch HaShulchan. Now, so it would seem like, not too much wiggle room, meaning you have a few Gedolei Achronim who are saying something that seems like you could update the standards for today's day and age. And l'chayra, if you're looking at the Aruch HaShulchan, you'd say the Aruch HaShulchan Kal V'chomer, in America, or Kal V'chomer in a real Western society today that's not under a czar would certainly be true. But I might see a place that say disregard these shinuyim that the Aruch HaShulchan is talking about because it's very hard to know the circumstances and why they wrote it. Now, there's a whole nother nekuda to look at in regards to the change maybe in the Dinim of Meiser. And that's a svara like this. The Ritva, in one of his chuvas, the Ritva is being written to by some sort of government agent, some sort of king or local magistrate who's writing to him in regards to the dinim of Meiser in his town, not Meiser, the dinim of extra legal judgments. The dinim of punishing people who are not the regular din. And the Ritva writes as follows, and he says like a bit of a lamda shechilik. He says there's two types of einshim. There are einshim. Someone commits an aveira, and in order to get a kapara, he needs an einish. That's the din. There are certain einshim that are masurim l'shamayim. There are certain einshim that are masurim b'dei adam. Sometimes Hashem has a prescribed einish. someone does, X Aveira, this is the einish he needs for a kapara. Says the Ritva, when the einish is to help a person who needs a kapara, so then there's a lot of restrictions. The Torah placed all sorts of restrictions on when to give the einish, how to implement the einish, only certain very specific cases are you chayiv in the einish. Marshal, he learns that the din, that by Hasra, we know the din is that a person only gets einish bezdin if you master him, but not just master him, he has to say afal pikein. He has to say, I don't care. So the Tva says, because Pashit, the einish, the kapara that he needs, a big chelik of it is for the begida. Like a chelik of the einish is for the I don't care chelik of it. So if a guy didn't show that he doesn't care, and he just did that Aveira, just that Aveira alone doesn't dictate such an einish, says the Ritva. Because that einish is given for the person who's getting the einish. Says the Ritva, but there's a whole other segment of einshim. There are einshim, he says, the ki advarim ha'elu, heim bedin shu, he says, advarim ha'elu, advarim shadayin oise, derech yisur, the tarumas harabim, something that's done for a complaint of the public, the sakinas harabim, to fix the rabbim, ulevar haram and aretz, and to eradicate evil from the world, ulasayig ha-latera, to make a siyag latera, ein kol zeh ma'akav b'dinenu, he says, ki ein hadin b'pnei nechbalim. The din is not because of the person getting the einish. It has nothing to do with him. We should start being concerned, does he really deserve it? Did he get it enough? Is it fit all the criteria? The einish is being given for a totally different reason. It's for the shar ha'am. To prevent things from slipping down a slippery slope and getting worse. So the Ritva lays down this kind of like klal that teaches us that the einshim of makin va'einshim and the einshim of moistrim and these type of things are einshim that are like I think we described this last week as like greater good einshim. It's like looking at the entire situation and saying like, how do we make the whole society function better? The whole Torah, the whole Klal Yisrael function better. These greater good einshim, says the Ritva, they have much less restrictions than einshim that are personal. So now that opens up an idea that if something is for the greater good and something is to shore up society, so then there could be times that being a meister shores up society. Meaning there could be times where by not turning someone in, you're allowing things to get out of control and you're allowing things to not be good. And I'll explain what I mean. The Gemara of Mitzvah and Daf Gimel brings a famous story with Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, where it says as follows. He was in a food establishment, a diner, and he saw a marshal, a guy whose job it is to arrest people, and he asks him, how do you do your job? How do you figure out who's guilty, who's not guilty? Like, well, what's the system? The guy tells him, listen, I have quotas to fill. The king wants a certain amount of arrests a week. I just make arrests. And I hope that I got the right guy. So Rabbi Elazar Shimon says, I'll teach you a good system, how you can make arrests. He says, sit in a diner, like we're sitting now, at 4 hours into the day, a little bit like a late morning, and see who's there. See someone who's sitting there drinking and eating, and he's like dozing, he can't keep his eyes open. He says, if he's a guy who works the night shift, okay, so he's a night shift worker, he's tired. If he's a Talmud Chacham, he was up learning late at night. But if he's not any one of those he's not a night shift worker and he's not a Talmud Chacham, then this is a guy who was up at night doing things he shouldn't be doing. So target this guy and figure out what he's doing wrong. So this new system becomes to be employed, and it's very successful. So it comes to the king's attention that there's a new system, and the king says, let the person who invented the system, let him become the marshal. Clearly you have a very good sense in figuring out who's a criminal, so why don't you step up and do it yourself? So they bring Elazar Reb Shimon, and he starts hunting down Ganvi. Now keep in mind, these Ganavim that we're talking about are Jewish Ganavim. They're not Goyim, they're Jewish Ganavim that Reb Shimon Elazar is isolating and bringing to the king's attention, and the king at that time is not as benevolent as the great Tsar Nikolai, and would maybe kill people for crimes like this. So Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, a contemporary, sends him a message, and he says, Chaimitz ben Yayin. He says, you're vinegar, the son of wine. Your father, Reb Shimon, was the real deal. You're busy giving Jews over. Until when are you going to give over the nation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be killed? Shalach leis, Reb Shimon Elazar answers him back, I'm getting rid of thorns and thistle that are in the vineyard over here. Klal Yisrael is a vineyard, Kerem B'Yavne, Klal Yisrael is a vineyard, and I'm eliminating the thorns and the things that are detrimental to Klal Yisrael. So Shalach leis, Reb Shua ben Karcha tells him back, Yavi Balakerem, Yechal Es Kaitzev. Let HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's in charge of the vineyard, get rid of his own kaitzim. Okay, and the Gemara continues, it's an arichos, and if you look where the oisius are, where we paskin like from this din and from this Gemara, we paskin like a Rabbi Shua ben Karcha. And the Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch in Shem Peiches and Siftas and Chayshim Mishpat says, you're not allowed to give Asr Limsa Yisrael B'Yad Goyim, Bein Begufay, Bein B'Mamayne, V'afilu Rasho Balaverus. Even if he's a sinner and he's a Rashi, he's a Balaveris, you're not allowed to give him over to a foreign element of justice. So it sounds like, from the Gemara, from Rishul ben Karcha, censure of Elazar ben Shimon, he's critiquing him. It sounds like we hold like Rishul ben Karcha. And that's how it's passed in the Shulchan Aruch. But Lemaisa, Reb Elazar ben Shimon is, he's a Hall of Famer. Elazar ben Shimon is not someone that we could just write off and say, yeah, he was a Meiser. Like Rishul ben Karcha says he was a Meiser, it's not Negeya. That's not an acceptable way to look at it. So says the Rashba in two places. Chuvas Rashba in two places brings down, and from this he builds quite an important, new vista to this halacha that we're talking about today. Says the Rashba, he says, "Oid gedolim mizu." It's a whole langa tshuva about a meiser, and the Rashba says, "Oid gedolim mizu." Shayir Reb Elazar ben Shimon, like we're referencing for this Gemara, tafas ganvi v'rishi b'harmon of the malka v'anish v'katluhu. He would capture, ganavim and etc., using a mandate from the king, and he would give them einshim and kill them. In another Gemara, it says, "Va'afal gav the amalei Rishul ben Karcha." Even though Rishul ben Karcha attacks him and says, "Chaymitz ben Yayin," that you're vinegar, the son of wine, Admasat the Mesirah ameni shel Elokeinu la'ariga, v'chein amalei, etc., etc. Mikol makim, says the Rashba. Leinasi l'Reb Elazar l'Rishmal b'tayim gurim leinashvi l'Reb Elazar l'Rishmal b'tayim gurim b'dinim u'farashim. It says it's impossible to frame Reb Elazar and Reb Shmuel as Pashut making grave errors in basic dinim that have a tremendous chaymer. Eloi says shemachmas chasidusam hayalehem lehimanim milaharig amash lechiv atayr misig muru kiyetzuvza. Elamai says you have to say that Rabbi Shua ben Karcha was attacking Reb Elazar ben Shimon and telling him that this is not acceptable, meant not acceptable for a man of your stature. He didn't mean not acceptable in Gansen. Not acceptable for you. To say you're not living up to the standards of your forefathers. Your forefathers were great tzaddikim, great chassidim, and you're slipping a little bit. But if he would have been a Tayyah Gomer, he says, he wouldn't have called him Chaimitz ben Yaim. If Reb Elazar ben Shimon would have been doing something that's Mesirah, he would have called him a Rasha Gomer. He would have said, Rasha, what are you doing? You can't do this. He says, Chaimitz ben Yaim. Chaimitz ben Yaim means something's not perfect over here. I'm not happy with it. But not that it's a Rishus. So says the Rashba, so then explain to me, make this make sense. How could we have a tremendous chaimer from Mesirah say that someone who's Meiser is, anyone could step in and kill him? He's a raid, if Habala Hargoy, just step up and kill him. Kol HaKodim Zacha, the Chuvas Arash says, Ein Lechelik Olam Haba. How do we have, on the one hand, Mesirah being Mamash, the Ergs Tazach, get rid of the guy, he's disaster. On the other hand, you have Amayroim, Tanoim, who are doing it, and the critique is like, you could do better. Now, that's the critique from the Gemara. So says the Rashba, Vaistais, that when it's preventative in nature, and it's to keep things yatziv, to keep a society strong, and it's mehormon of the malka, it's within a system. The hormon of the malka means it's within a system. It's not just wanton isha yashabein of yasa. It's not one person who's running the show and doing whatever he wants. It's within a system, and it's to keep things stable and good for everyone. It says Vaistais, that's not Mesirah. So what the Rashba does is he takes this Ritva Svara, that heyois, the whole einish, is for the greater good, is to keep things stable. So then sometimes Mesirah could be the mitzvah. Like, by meaning, sometimes being a meiser, you take an individual who just cheated on his taxes, it's got nothing to do with you, but you're a busybody, and you call up the IRS and you turn him in, meiser, terrible. But you take someone who's doing, terrible, terrible things to society, to people around him, and you turn him in, says the Rashba, as long as it's provided it's within a system, that's what Reb Elazar ben Shimon was doing. He says maybe it's not what the greatest guy in the world should be busy with, but if someone's doing it, it's a job that needs to be done. Now, where is this relevant? So, there's a few chuvas, there's a few chuvas about children who are being hurt by adults, in one way or another, in all the ways that you're thinking. Now, the Tzitz Eliezer has a tshuva from a doctor, Professor Avram Sefer Abraham, a Gracie Talmud Chacham actually, a Gracie Mechaber Svarim, a Talmud Chacham, but a doctor, who writes him a shayla asking him, we need to set policy in the hospital. He says when a child comes in with an injury, that's clearly because an adult gave him an injury. And the law is that we're supposed to alert the government about this injury. But if we do so, this child will probably be taken away from the parents and put to live who knows where with who knows what. Bays, the rest of the children from the family might be taken away and put to live with another family. He says, are we allowed to do that? That's child number one. And child number two, he says, is a daughter who's being abused by her father. There's no pikuach nefesh, he says, but clearly there's severe damage and trauma that's being inflicted. Am I or do I have to turn these people in to the authorities? Now, interestingly, in the tshuva itself, he goes with dinei roidif and habala hargacha, and how if a guy is doing things that are detrimental and that are very dangerous, then it's incumbent on you as a society to get rid of him. The Rishim ben Elazar version of Kaitzimini Mechal Me'akarim, the Rashba, the Ritva, the Gemara and Mitzvah. Kaitzimini Mechal Me'akarim, you can't let evil just exist and go unpunished, go unchecked. Because the evil that's left unchecked will just blossom and flourish, and that's not acceptable. Now, it's not a very long tshuva, but he basically says it's pashut to him that in both of these cases, whether it's physical or otherwise, it's a din of a roidif, it's a din of habala hargacha, and kol hakodim liskos, just get in there and be mechal of this person, get rid of this person. Incidentally, b'shulei ha'mechtav, like a later edition, he brings that he actually brings without the Aruch HaShulchan. Strangely enough, the Tzitz Eliezer brings that Aruch HaShulchan. He says it really depends. Gam b'arkoyes shalakim. He says even if you're going to arkoyes shalakim, not all arkoyes are created equal. Some are much worse than others. Some are villed and make no sense, and some are systematized and.
First time you should kill him physically.
No. He's talking about turning into the government. He's not talking about it. He's talking about turning into the government. He says turn into the government because they're a danger. They're a danger for society. But then he also brings down the Aruch HaShulchan. So clearly he was not of the camp that held that the Aruch HaShulchan should be in Gansen disregarded and say that the Aruch HaShulchan was under pressure. The Aruch HaShulchan wasn't writing what he really thought. Now, there are other tshuvas a little bit before him, like the Beis Yitzchak, Ritzik Kashmalkis from Europe, where he says that Bizman Hazeh, for Inyani Mamanis, it's not Mesirah. But what he does is take this svara of the Rashba and the Ritva and make it halacha l'maisa, and says, no, protecting society could be the greatest, non-meiser move. Meaning, being a meiser could be the greatest. Now, one second. So now, it's hard to say. This is how. Here, I don't know if anyone argues, but this is how it should be framed. The Shlomo Zalman, the Tzitz Eliezer, they all say this. Now, Rabbi Yashiv, which he was asked this question by Rafaival Cohn, Zatzal, who asked him that this shaila. He says a child who's being hurt by his parent or something like that, and the question: should you go to the government? Could you give over this information to the local authorities? Now, ostensibly, Rafaival is talking about in America, not in Eretz Yisrael. So that's real archaic, meaning you could make an argument that Eretz Yisrael is all Jews. So even though they don't have a Beis Din, and Tzitz Eliezer handles that argument, but Rafaival is asking in America. Rabbi Yashiv writes him back as follows. Rabbi Yashiv says, Ayin Rashut Rashba, Chelik Gimel, Siman Shin Tzadik Gimel, where the Rashba writes that societies must have standards. He brings it, the whole Rashba. He says, Mitoch Dever Rashba Shaminan, the Bedavar Sheyesh Be Mishum Tikkun Ha'olam. Something that's Mishum Tikkun Ha'olam, Yesh Koyach L'Chachmei Yisrael Shebechol Dar V'dar, and this is an important line. Yesh Koyach L'Chachmei Yisrael Shebechol Dar V'dar. It's not willy-nilly, like put out a bulletin, everyone go hunting. It's open season. You have a tag, go find someone. That's not what it's about. Yesh koyach l'chacham yisrael shebechol dar v'dar ligdar geder v'lamed b'peretz gam b'makom she'en lanu tzir shel humna demalka. And this is important. Rabbi Yashiv even strips away the humna demalka. Rabbi Yashiv says chacham yisrael shebechol dar v'dar could make rules and could make things to make sure that dangerous behaviors and dangerous evil is not running amok and is being unchecked. So, and then he brings the Gemara of Mitzvah with Shimon ben Elazar. So Meili says this is Achein Kol Zeh, says Rabbi Yashiv, another caveat. You have to really know that this took place. Allegations is not enough. You have to really know that this took place. In that case, says Rabbi Yashiv, turning the person is mishum tikkun ha'olam. It's the good thing. Okay, the Meiser, Rafaival followed up with him, and Rafaival asked him, fine, you're addressing the shaila of this child being taken away or the parent going to jail. He says, what about the rest of the children in the household? There are the rest of the children in the household. They're also going to be taken away. They might go to Friday households. Are you balancing the evil of the rest of the children being taken out of the household? So says Rabbi Yashiv, Hadavar Tali B'Kama Gormim. He says it's a complicated shaila. There's many components to the question. He says, essentially, when you're giving over from kids who nothing is wrong with them, from a from household, to go, be in the system because you're reporting the parents, those children, it's like you're giving over neshamas to the outside world. There's no question that if the child spends even 3 months or 6 months in foster care in some home, who knows where, that's going to have an impact on him, he says. So then he says also, you have to take into account what darga of abuse are we talking about. What the secular world considers abuse might not be what the halachic world considers abuse. He says, I'll call mikro tzarech shikol das v'achra yidei talmidei chachamim gedolim b'Torah v'Yerushalayim. And that's where he ends off the tshuva. So I think the proper way to frame it is, I don't know if there's cholkim, but there are countervening, things that have to be balanced out in every shaila. And to that, Rabbi Yashiv kind of like pulls it back a little bit. Like he starts with the Rashba and the Gemara Mitzvah and says it in a more klalistic fashion. And then when you ask him the details, Rabbi Yashiv is like, Lamaisa, every one of these details are important, and it's something that needs to be case by case with Gedolim to be decided. So I think as a matter of lumdus, as a matter of svara, what the Tzitz Eliezer, what the Rashba, what the Ritva, what the Gemara Mitzvah, what Rabbi Yashiv is saying is a very clear yisod. That Hayos the din of Mesirah is established for the greater good, to protect society. So sometimes protecting society can take on a new face. I think that is a clear yisod that certainly is true. Now, on a case-by-case basis, that Rabbi Yashiv is saying, clearly you need to have guidance to make sure that's done right. Now, one more spin-off of this idea of Mesirah being Paishat Tzur or Levish Tzur, meaning it take on a whole different meaning based on the circumstances, is I saw a rant from Rabbi Yisrael Shapansky. The Rabbi Reuven Shapansky from Mir Yeshiva's father was a big chacham, wrote many svarim, books, whatever. So he has a rant. In 1955, there was a terrorist attack in Yerushalayim. I couldn't find which one it is. I tried to search, I couldn't find it. That was caught on camera. Now, today, that happens all the time. Back then, that was rare. It was caught on camera where terrorists stormed the bus, and they took over the bus, and there was 4 terrorists on the bus, and then the Israeli, special forces team pounced on them, and in the video you see 4 terrorists with their hands up on the bus, and the Israeli team in control. But by the time these terrorists made it to the holding station, there was only 1 live terrorist. So clearly, some of them were summarily executed. Made a move like this, and that was the end. Goodbye. There's no tolerance, and I think it might have even been caught on camera. And the leftists in Israel began to make a huge tumult. What type of country is this? We're just in the shadow of the Holocaust. We're just in the shadow of great barbarity that went on, and we're no different than them. We're just executing people in the street. And Yisrael Shapansky writes a 2-page letter in a cheveres that was around then, an angry rant that of course it's the right thing and there should be zero tolerance and just kill them, execute them. They have a din of roidif, and then he spins off and he says, and even if you're going to tell me that they don't have a din of roidif because the deed is done, right? They're under control. They're at gunpoint now. There's no din of roidif. He says, even if you tell me there's no din of roidif, but they have the din of a meiser. He says, what's a meiser? A meiser, even though the deed is done, but if a guy's a habitual meiser and he's a danger to society and he's a great evil to society, you execute him, you get rid of him. Because it doesn't matter all the rules, the ticky-tacky regulations, that's not important. He's a danger. He says, these terrorists are meisrim, and you have to get rid of them. So it's the same idea of the concept of meiser being used as a general klal for protection of society. So he turns terrorists into meiser. The Tzitz Eliezer and Yashiv turn abusers into meisrim. The Rashba is turning, people who are not meiser into meisrim. It's paishat tzur, it's levish tzur. The point is, it's something that's for the greater good, for the protection of society. And at the point in time where that meant not being meiser, so that had the greatest chaymer. At the point in time where it means being meiser, so that has a big chaymer. Or it means killing terrorists. B'chol, this is all halacha of aloy l'maisa. Ask your LOR.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.